the Introduction to Qualitative Theory video. Throughout this video lecture, I'm going to be covering some of the different philosophical assumptions that are embedded within all of research. And by that I mean all research, both quantitative and qualitative. It's important to keep in mind that every theory that hopes to explain something rests on a particular set of assumptions. Now, some people see their assumptions as truths, meaning there's only one way to get at the answer, whereas others may see their assumptions as truth, such as truth with small t, meaning there are multiple potential ways to get at any one answer. It's important to remember that whenever we're talking about theory, we have to understand that every theory is based on both ontological and epistemological assumptions. I'll be covering what these terms mean in a little bit. So let's begin. Let's begin with the notion of paradigm. Paradigm was first introduced by Thomas Kuhn in 1962. He introduced the term, but the meaning was very specific. It was intended to mean a scientific paradigm being the universally recognized scientific achievements that, for a particular time, provide model problems and solutions for a community of researchers. Okay, now one element of Kuhn's paradigm is that paradigms are incommensurable. Two paradigms cannot be reconciled with each other because they cannot be subjected to the same common standard of comparison. Therefore, you couldn't have one paradigm and a competing paradigm at the same point in time. Now, this doesn't work well for philosophy of science, or really even social science. So for a philosophy of science, paradigm is better understood as an explanatory model or conceptual framework. This suggests a barrier to comparison is not the absence of common units of measurements, but an absence of mutually compatible concepts. So again, we'll use the term paradigm to be understood as an explanatory model or a conceptual framework. Now, we'll talk about two overarching paradigms, the objectivist and the constructionists. We'll talk about this throughout this video lecture. Keep in mind that objectivists have certain qualities, that they believe that reality exists apart from any operations of consciousness. They distinguish scientifically established objective meanings from subjective meanings that people hold. And they accept meaning as important in people's lives, however it takes people's everyday understanding as inferior to more scientific understandings. Constructionists are very different. They place all understandings, scientific and non-scientific, on the same footing. All are constructions. Therefore, none are purely objective or absolute. Nothing is truly generalizable. Science is only one form of constructed knowledge designed to serve a particular purpose. Okay, let's go over some really key terms to know. Ontological. Ontology, or what is ontological, is based on what is real, or the nature of reality. An ontological question would ask, does something exist? And would try to prove that it does exist. Epistemological. Epistemological questions, or the notion of epistemology, deals with what is knowledge? How do we know? It also is very interested in the relationship between the researched and the researcher. So again, epistemological questions would ask, how do we know that something is real? Methodology. Methodology is the theory that informs the research. Do you remember earlier in one of my videos when I suggested that one of the takeaway points to all this course would be for you to distinguish between method and methodology? Here's where it starts. Methodology is the theory that informs the research. It's not method. Methodology are the principles by which you design a research project, that you develop the field techniques and interpret the data. It can't be method. Methods are interviews, observations, etc. Behind every methodology is a philosophical stance or theory. Now remember how we said in the first slide that every theory is based on an assumption. It's important to know what assumptions are underpinning your particular methodology. A methodology also provides a rationale for your method. Axiology refers to the role of values. I'll make the argument throughout this course that no research is value neutral, that all researchers, regardless of their orientation, be it objectivist or constructionist, bring values to the research. We all bring biases, we all bring assumptions, and we must keep those assumptions and bias in check while we're doing our interpretation. Rhetorical is the role of language. That is a role that language plays and the type of language that you use to present your findings to your audience. And finally, method. Method is a concrete techniques or procedures that you will use to collect your data. And here's where we see the difference between methodology and method. I'm sure you've probably heard the terms ethnography, phenomenology, grounded theory, discourse analysis, case study. Those are all terms that we would use for methodology, the theoretically informed means by which we approach our research. Methods are different. Methods are the concrete techniques or procedures that you use to collect data. So for example, observation, or interviews, or documents. It's important not to get these confused, even though oftentimes that they are. Now, a few more key terms to know. These are terms you may have come across while you've been doing your reading. First is the term deductive. Deductive typically means taking general knowledge, general observations, and then moving to specific conclusions. Oftentimes what is seen as the opposite of deductive is inductive, and that would be taking specific information and moving to general. Emic versus etic. These are two perspectives that are essential in qualitative research, attempting to get both the emic or the insider view as well as the etic or the outsider view. Now, this is something that I hope you take away from this course. The distinction between quantitative and qualitative happens at the level of method, not at the theoretical level. You could do a quantitative, objectivist, or constructionist study. Likewise, a qualitative, constructionist, or objectivist study. Again, the difference between quantitative and qualitative does not happen at the theoretical level. It happens at the level of method. What method you choose to answer your research question. Now, let me try to give you a few examples. Here we have our coffee cup sitting in front of our computer. Now, if I were to ask you, is your coffee cup real? Does it really exist? How do I know it's sitting there in front of my computer? This is an ontological question. I'm asking about the reality or the existence of something. Now, what about how do I know something like my coffee cup is real? How do I learn about this thing called the coffee cup? How do I experience a coffee cup? How do I learn what it is? That's an epistemological question. Keep in mind, an ontological question makes an assumption about reality. It begins with reality and it makes an assumption about reality. An epistemological question makes assumptions about knowledge. It begins with knowledge and then asks questions about reality. Okay, so remember our two paradigms, objectivists and constructionists. Keep in mind, objectivists begin ontologically. These are the important differences between the two. Objectivists begin asking ontological questions. What is real? And then they ask, how do we know about what is real? Now, in contrast, are constructionists. Constructionists begin epistemologically. They first begin with questions of, how do we know? And then they ask questions of, how do we know what is real based on how we know? So it's important to understand within these two different paradigms, they begin differently, and therefore they move forward in the research designs differently. Okay, let's begin by discussing some of the key differences between two of the paradigms that we just got done talking about, the objectivist and the constructionist. Now keep in mind again, objectivists begin ontologically, constructionists begin epistemologically. Okay, one key component of objectivism is a sense that reality exists apart from any operations of consciousness, being human consciousness. So, some type of external reality exists regardless of whether or not humans are conscious of that reality. And of course, constructionists would take the counter argument that it is human consciousness that has constructed the reality by which we observe and by which we live in. So again, for constructionists, it's more about how we know and then what's real. For objectivists, it's more about let's establish what is real and then we'll talk about what we know. Objectivists always distinguish scientifically established objective meanings from the subjective meanings that people hold. So again, what is scientifically seen as objective is different and seen differently as the subjective meanings that people hold. Again, the counter argument that constructionists make is that it's people who've created the scientifically established objective meaning, so we can't separate scientifically established objectivity from the subjectivity that people have because people are the ones that created these notions of objectivity. Okay, objectivists also see people's subjective meanings at best reflective or they approximate these objective meanings. Part of it is the objectivist camp is that we can actually separate what is objective and what is subjective. And again, the counter argument for constructionists would be that's difficult because humans have created subjectively what we know and what we understand. Another key piece to the objectivist paradigm is that objectivists accept the meaning as important in people's lives. However, it takes people's everyday understandings as inferior epistemologically to the more scientific understandings. So within the objectivist camp, you see a hierarchy that scientific, and of course a certain definition of scientific, is superior to the subjective meanings that people have in their everyday lives. So there's a very much of a hierarchy that's established within objectivism that there is particular knowledge that we can see as objective and then particular knowledge that is seen as subjective. And of course, the constructionists take the opposite view, and we'll talk about that in just a moment. Okay, so now as we move over to the constructionist paradigm, there's some key pieces that you'll see stand in contrast to the objectivist camp. First of all, constructionists place all understandings, and I mean all understandings, both scientific and non-scientific, on the same footing. Constructionists see every kind of scientific knowledge as well as subjective personal knowledge all as human constructions. So scientific knowledge compared to other human knowledge, there is no hierarchy. They're all constructions. Now, constructionists basically take to task this question of objectivity, suggesting that there is nothing that's truly objective, nothing that's truly absolute, and therefore nothing that's truly generalizable. That everything, because they are constructions, are fallible and can potentially be challenged in the future. And once we realize that a fact gets challenged and then maybe gets overturned, is an example of how it's been constructed to begin with. Now, that's been a very quick overview to some key theoretical ideas. We'll continue to talk about those ideas throughout the course, especially when we meet face-to-face. So I'll keep coming back to these ideas and do some refreshers. But in the meantime, let's talk about some homework. The following questions come from your Denson and Lincoln reading. So I've got 3 questions for you that I'd like for you to answer. First, why is it important to note that these paradigms relate to the social sciences? This is one of the key pieces that students sometimes struggle with, is that natural science and the way that natural science hypothesizes and structures objectivity and subjectivity in those pieces is very different than how social science structures it. So one of the questions I have for you to answer for me is, why is it important to note that these paradigms are related to the social sciences, not natural sciences? Second, explain in your own words the ontology and epistemology for each of the different paradigms and how this impacts the criteria for judging quality. What I really want for you to tell me is, in very simplistic terms, in your own words, not in the words of Denson or Lincoln, but what is ontology, what is epistemology in terms of these 2 paradigms, and then think about, okay, well then if ontology means this and epistemology means this, then how does this impact the criteria for judging quality within those paradigms? This, of course, becomes important as we talk about validity. When we get down into class and talk about the validity of qualitative research, this becomes part of it because you understand the theoretical assumptions that go into it. And your last question for this particular piece of it is, what are the differences among the paradigms? Well, the differences among the paradigms are not merely philosophical, okay? What are the practical consequences of conducting research in all the different paradigms described? So to think about the consequences within the different paradigms of conducting research within those, and then you begin to see how these different paradigms have different theoretical orientations, and those theoretical orientations drive how you do the research, how you validate the research, and what is considered quality. Okay, and just a little bit more homework, and this is from Glessner chapter 1 and also Maxwell chapter 2. So one is, which of the different methodologies seems to best suit you? You don't have to choose one now, and that's forever, but take a look at the different methodologies that are described, and what do you think is a good one, a good fit for you? Second, what theoretical camp or paradigm might you be situated in? Which of those different camps do you feel best aligns with some of the assumptions that you already have about how you see the world? And three, this is from Maxwell chapter 2, what are your goals for your own research interests? Now, I'd like you to submit these answers to me in an email text. Please don't send them as an attached document because I'd like to reply to you within that email. And if you can, send them to me by June 13th. All right, I hope you've enjoyed this overview, brief overview for the theoretical orientations. I will again talk about this more when we meet face to face and help clarify and help clear up any kind of misunderstandings or any kind of questions that you have. And I look forward to seeing you soon in class. Have a great day.